Greetings to all my old and new friends. I recognize many of the names among participants, but not all of them, which is good. And I'm looking forward to having hopefully a relaxed conversation among friends and comrades. So just a few technical things. We are recording the webinar, so you'll be able to access it later. We'll be sending out the link. Also, closed captioning is available if anybody wants to use it for any reason. I would say that for those of you that haven't heard it, introduce yourselves in the chat. You can rename yourself if you want to, but you probably won't be seeing your faces of everybody. So use the chat to tell us whatever, and remember to save the chat so you can see which of your friends is on the call. Okay, I think our expectations are pretty modest. We haven't talked about this topic much in DSA, and I'm going to talk a little bit later about some of my own resistance to talking about aging and ageism. I'll do that in a one time later. So I think we're pretty much good to go. We have the question and answer available. So if you want to ask a question later or while the panelists are making presentations, put it in the Q&A. We may group a few questions with some help so that the panelists have time to answer them. This webinar will take about an hour and 25 minutes more. Yeah, so we can't accomplish too much on all these topics, but we have great panelists, and a lot of people have worked on planning this, which I'll thank everyone officially at the end. So without further ado, I think I'd like to get on to one of our main speakers, which is Margaret Gullette, who is a resident scholar in the women's studies, the women's studies program at Brandeis University, and author of the book called Ending Ageism, or How Not to Shoot Old People, which came out in 2017. We'll tell you more about that book later. And I'm just going to turn it over to Margaret, and she's going to tell us in an all too brief period about her work on ageism. She's one of the leading scholars and proponents of ending ageism, and I'll leave it to Margaret to tell us all about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I actually am. You'll see what I'm talking about. It's an aspect of ageism. This is great being on DSA, and I know that there are new people here who some of whom don't even know what the initials stand for. So at some point, I'll say it now: Democratic Socialists of America, people. With so many of the young embracing the word socialist, this is a good time for DSA as it grows to move toward creating intergenerational solidarity across the life course. And everyone should know how ageism works to undermine that kind of solidarity. And that's what I'm talking about today. It's about the baby boomers. The title is From Adorable Baby Bulge to #Boomer Remover, How to Scapegoat an Age Cohort. What did those poor boomers ever do to deserve it? Over their lifetimes, the age cohorts known collectively as boomers experienced a weirdly constructed narrative arc. In childhood, they were viewed as adorable. Tom Wolfe, a mythifier himself, said in 1990 that myth is not too pompous a word for the aura that shone round about them. But over their disparate and unequal lifetimes through the 21st century, the noun boomers was fictionalized and intentionally politicized. the connotations for the people concerned changed markedly. Growing toward old age, some of them with the benefit of longevity, they began to be treated as too numerous, a tsunami, and too expensive, unwanted, and expendable. That's quite an arc. Originally, the term baby boomer simply denoted an unusually large group of children born mostly after World War II in the United States. Canonically, that's the years 1946 to 1964. Over those 19 years, 76 million were born. They didn't all benefit from longevity. By 2012, nearly 11 million had died, leaving some 65 million native-born survivors. This demographic bulge became an influential social scientific concept, for good or ill. Of all the age cohort names contrived since then, Gen X, Z, millennials, boomers alone had a demographic anchor, and the given name had an economic rationale. Boomers originally chimed with the rebounding post-war economy, the boom years. The boom years lasted long enough for the government to build schools for them, housing, roads, and in the 1960s, safety nets for their parents' old age, Medicare and Medicaid. The white workforce was unionized enough to provide full employment and rising wages for whites. Black Americans of all ages, gays, people with disabilities, and women built movements for equality. About 1980, the Reagan years, however, the rich promises of the boom began to wither. The economy began a long slide that with crevasses, the recessions of 1982 to 1985, 1991 to 92, 1997 to 98, 2001, and especially the long global recession of 2008. And that slide continues with intermittent showy peaks in the stock market. When wages started to stagnate, the working populace became increasingly unequal. The millions called the boomers then became the scapegoats, blamed for the misfortunes of cohorts who had been born later into less favorable circumstances. And the trick I'm going to explain was done through narrative. The storyboard, I discern, treated these millions as if they had a single life course and even a character arc, like the protagonist of a movie. In the 1980s, the group of then young adults was named yuppies, even though the youngest was barely 15, and only a minority were college educated, upwardly mobile, or professionals. And the women increasingly joining the workforce hit glass ceilings. The cohort's economic well-being was, on average, higher than that of their predecessors at the same age, but only for those disproportionately remaining single, having fewer children, and coupling childbearing with mother's work, the two-income family. Yuppies were recharacterized as aging boomers when the youngest were not yet 40. Their future growth in income would have had to come from wage increases, but wages stagnated. In midlife, even double income families found saving for retirement hard. Popular nonfiction treated them as formerly having been idealistic agents of social change, some part of the 68ers, but now they were said to have grown ambitious, cutthroat, and conservative politically. Gerontologist Harry Rick Moody called these differing character ascriptions the boomer wars. The even newer young, the Xers, had first been described as slackers, in contrasting to that hard working older group, as I argued in my book, Age by Culture. But as recessions hit, as manufacturing was outsourced overseas, and the low-wage gig economy appeared, the Xers, those former slackers, were redescribed as the victims of the boomers' stranglehold on jobs. It was the first assault of a contrived generational war. To ease out midlife employees in favor of younger workers, the boomers were soon being called deadwood, even as diversity-minded human resources directors touted them as loyal, usefully experienced, focused. Job discrimination, which is best called middle ageism, when it deletes people as young as 40 or 50, has become a fact of US economic life, especially for women and people of color, although the Age Discrimination in Employment Act had made such practices ostensibly illegal. Age discrimination worsened after the long recession of 2008. A large tranche of people were forced into long-term unemployment and often premature retirement, and some committed suicide. That's good data, actually, from the CDC. Since March 2020, and this is new news, new research announced today by the Economic Policy Institute at the New School, since March 2020, the size of the non-working population between ages 55 and 74 expanded beyond its normal trend by an additional 1.1 million people. So if you hear this narrated as the Great Resignation among older workers, the surge is really the result of mass job loss. The bad press about the boomers won early on so completely that the label became a libel that people resented. I'm no boomer, you could hear people saying at meetings and to themselves and to one another. In 2022, legal filings revealed that the IBM executives discussing in earlier emails how to force out older workers had derided them as dino babies, who should be made an extinct species. That's a quote. Executives at the highest levels had eliminated thousands over 40. IBM bosses in these emails were not ashamed to use hostile, Darwinian, evolutionary language against their older employees. And among themselves, they seem to have understood that strange neologism, dino babies. The next political step was making this large group's aging into old age mean and fatal. This was accomplished by arguing that nation states were unlucky if they had had a longevity revolution. Older adults would become a burden that younger working people, who were often referred to as the nation, could not afford to support. Despite being critiqued as apocalyptic demography, this belief was promoted to become, unfortunately, a very big and an unavoidable story. Noticing that much of the conservative writing on generational equity, quote unquote, was published in the popular press rather than in academic journals, Dan Book writes, critics of the American welfare state now wielded the baby boomer crisis narrative like a weapon. And I think I'll read that again. Critics of the American welfare state now wielded the alleged baby boomer crisis, a narrative, like a weapon. As early as 1984, deficit hawks had generously funded a group who called themselves Americans for Generational Equity. So if you use that term, they've been trying to get you to do so. In 2008, a man committed to privatizing Social Security named Peter Peterson committed $1 billion to create his own foundation to counter, quote, the impending fiscal cliff, unquote, of retirement. Now, neoliberals were touting deficit reduction in order to unravel the safety nets that take care of Americans medically, Medicare and Medicaid, and economically, Social Security. The lies of the generational equity discourse attempted to create anger and fear in younger adults who constantly heard that boomers, stereotypically but incorrectly assumed to be well-to-do, some of them, of course, are extremely well-to-do. They're the wealthiest people in the world. But on average, they're not all billionaires. Okay, younger adults constantly heard that boomers were selfishly hoarding jobs and wealth to deprive the young of a decent future. That is not going to stop people. The young were mendaciously told that boomers would also use up Social Security. That's not how it works, of course. Okay, boomer, said sarcastically, became a popular put down via the visual social media app TikTok in 2019. The snarky put down perversely made older individuals responsible for retrograde ideas and even global warming, the latest example of overwrought political content linked to their age and their supposed group power. Boomer bashing became even uglier in spring 2020 when COVID-19 started killing mostly older adults and nursing home residents. The pandemic was greeted gleefully on social media as a hashtag boomer remover. So far, the mythicized babies have been uniquely unfortunate in popular characterizations of their life course. As they grew older, they, not the economy, were said to decline. In any generation, people over 65 are going to be a numerical minority, and their political differences dilute any voting power they might have as a bloc. This brief history shows how right-wing ideology in a particular historical and economic period, how it worked, how it reframed facts, how it hurt older adult self-image, how it threatened to take away their Social Security, and among the young who believed the lies, created a too eager anticipation of having retired people and nursing facility residents die off. That's rather ugly. Some cultural wars, racism and sexism, are visible. Ageism, the bias which constructs people as they grow older as defective and inferior to currently young adults in various domains, ageism is not as visible. So the ways in which older adults are persecuted seriously or jocularly are underestimated. And baby boomers is not yet a contested bit of language. The label ought to be avoided, as should Gen X. That group, referring to people born between 1965 and the early 1980s, had no name or cohort identity until 1991, when a Canadian novelist arbitrarily rounded them up and the popular press got into the game again. The Xers turning 40, I hope there are people who are in that age group here. The Xers turning 40 will be next in line for ageist job discrimination. And as they in turn near Social Security age, the next burden discourses. Ideally, scholars and journalists and teachers and all of us would historicize the nomenclature and deconstruct the attributes. Best, of course, would be decrying all cohort labels for any age group now and henceforth, and with them, the false fictional characterizations and aspersions about decline that cohort naming make possible. If we want solidarity, we must do this. But this sordid history leaves behind withering economic middle ageism and lethal ageism that remain for all social justice warriors to fight. Fight ageism, not aging, and let's do it together. So, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Margaret. We may be the first ones to have the benefit of this particular essay. You sent me an advanced copy, and it's wonderful. Are you going to? Will this be published later? Do you think? Well, when it is published, we'll send a link to it, right?
Terrific. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it will be published.
It's really nice. I don't want to. I also want to praise the book. But let me say, the book is longer and more complicated. It raises a lot more. You could not have summarized it in 15 minutes, Margaret. Yeah, but I do. This is a wonderful essay. And
Thank
Teresa Alt asking questions and answer, quick Q&A. Is there anyone here who's too old to be a boomer? And I answered, yes, I am.
Yes,
Margaret's
I am.
too old to be a boomer. Susan's too old to be a boomer. I
don't think
I actually have a story about this because I don't know why I'm moderating this panel. I'm not actually an expert on ageism, apart from being 81. I used to feel that I was not very subject to ageism. Even in DSA, which is a pretty contested area with lots of vigorous young people active on social media, I have never felt personally attacked. My ideas are, disregarded and, are clear minority. But I don't think I got dissed personally. People don't understand my ideas very well because they have a very different generational experience. But I think, hey, so I personally don't feel subject to ageism. But as I reading Margaret's book to prepare for tonight, I realized something. It gave me a real insight. In my youth, I was an extreme ageist. I mean, I was really, really outrageous. I could tell a couple of stories about that, but because I was a little older than the typical member of the New Left, I kind of identified downwards, and I tried to act and look younger than I was for weird reasons. And I remember when the New American Movement came along, with Susan and Chris were also members. What really attracted me about it was that it was new. It wasn't one of the old political parties or, one of what I thought the discredited liberals and leftists. It was something new, and we were the young people that were going to carry this forward. There were books like Stephen Spender's The Year of the Young Rebels, came out in 1968, that sort of praised us as a group. There was a lot of thought, the youthful, and reading the Port Huron statement, I really identified with it. I thought Tom Hayden was a marvelous writer and really captured the spirit of the way I felt. And then when I was teaching in Carnegie Mellon in my late 20s and early 30s, I used to play records like of Tim Buckley called The Antique People. I used to play that to my students, which is a very cruel song about old people. But even the milder version, like Bob Dylan's The Times They Are Changing, listen to the generational hostility in that song. I mean, it's perfectly normal for young people to reject the ideas of their elders.
No.
I think it was normal in my generation anyway, Margaret. I just want to make the point that I'm not surprised that a lot of the young DSA members don't really appreciate or understand the democratic socialist tradition that many of us share here. I don't think we should withdraw from them or not be there. I think we need to be with them and stand, not give them room to develop, but stand beside them and, not just be scolding parents, but maybe more like more generous, lenient grandparents, or in my case, great grandparents. I just think that's my sense, and I just want to say that Margaret added one concept that I find very good. She talks about in her book about the young judge that's part of ourselves, and kind of is very critical of things that are old, and even now that self is still part of me, and part of me doesn't really want to be thought of as an old person, and I think that's a kind of ageism that Margaret has helped me see, and so I guess that's my little personal biography about ageism and political action. I'm becoming suddenly more reconciled to myself as a elder activist, and not ironically, but proud of that and wanting to contribute. I'm going to I hope to end the webinar with a reference to Third Act, which I think is a pretty good organization. I'll come back to that. But now that was my introduction to Susan. Now I'm not going to tell you what Susan's going to say, because she has a very different experience experiences than I have, although we're part of the same generation and part of some of the same movements. But I think we were on different coasts, and I think her perspective is very different. And she shared some of it with me, and I know you'll want to hear her sharing of it with you as well. So Susan, please take it away.
Thank you, Paul. I really appreciate your optimism and sense of solidarity with all the generations in DSA and in the movement. And I don't want anything that I say later on to contradict that. Just a little bit about myself. Sometimes it helps to know where someone's coming from. I'm actually, I was born in 45, so I missed the baby boom, which actually was a demographic result of the Second World War, when folks got home and started having babies. So my class was the last not to stretch the capacity of the kindergartens and elementary schools and all along the way. I grew up in a very kind of white middle-class suburb of Hartford, Connecticut, and went to the University of Michigan hoping to study. I was naively taken in sort of by the Orientalism, if you will. I wanted to study comparative religions and especially Asian thought, but I was waylaid by the first teach-in to ever exist anywhere at the University of Michigan on the war in Vietnam, and became radicalized in Students for a Democratic Society, got active in that in about 1965, with a man that I married a couple of years later from Venezuela. And I was overtaken by the idea that white America was not going to wake up to its imperialist role in the world, and thought that some of the writings of Che Guevara and a Frenchman named Regis Debray, and the call to make 2-3 many Vietnams. So I went to Venezuela with my now ex-husband and participated in an underground movement for about 4 years. If you ever have a chance to see a Cuban movie called Las Aventuras de Juan Quinquin, I want to recommend it. It's a kind of the Keystone Cops of the guerrilleros, the movements. And we did a lot of things wrong, almost everything. And I ended up deported with a 1-year-old child and came to Los Angeles, where I found Dorothy Healy and feminism and socialist feminism, and joined a group called 40 Socialists in Search of a Party. And we eventually joined New American Movement. By the way, there's a Dorothy Healy documentary online that a friend of mine made. And she had come out of the US Communist Party at the time of the Czechoslovakian Revolution. One thing and another, I didn't deal very well with the trauma that I felt as a result of my unsuccessful experiences, and eventually divorce from my ex-husband, and started smoking a lot of pot, and finally had to cope with the fact that I was a marijuana addict. And yes, you can get addicted to marijuana. Everybody that smokes it doesn't, just like everybody who drinks alcohol doesn't become an alcoholic. But nobody would deny that there are alcoholics, and there certainly are potheads. So I took a rest from radical politics for a while I was getting my head together and recovering. And I have worked a lot in the field of substance abuse, and eventually got into a relationship with my current spouse, a woman who was studying social work. And I thought, oh, I could do that, because I'd always wanted to go back to school and really look at social movement theory. So we moved up here. I live in Berkeley and went to school at San Francisco State. And in the discipline of social work, there's the clinical side and there's the community side. So, for example, Jane Addams was one of the founders of social work, a lesbian, by the way, and she did block by block studies in Chicago of immigrant working conditions and social life, and was able to document some of the exploitation that existed in her time. My interest was in networking the left, and I had wanted all of us to be able to be in a single organization, but realized that actually that's not very likely to happen. But our relationships with each other across issues and across organizations, on the ground, we have the connections to be a more united left if we take advantage of those connections and trust each other a little bit. And we can actually unify in solidarity in ways that are unlikely to happen without those connections. I want to talk a little bit about aging, and then I'll get into some issues that I have experienced. I believe that, like other isms, we often are unaware of the extent to which we've internalized the oppression that we're subject to. So a lot of, you'll hear women say, well, I'm not a feminist, but I don't want to be told I can't work outside the home, or that I have to please my husband. And Ibram Kendi in his books talks about having incorporated a racist attitude toward African Americans. So, and I think a lot of Latinos, certainly people coming to the United States, are not aware of the anti-immigrant racism, and logically consider that they're white because they haven't had to grow up with the racist ascription of characteristics based on being Latino. They're from Mexico or Central America, one of the countries like Guatemala or Honduras. They don't think of themselves as Latino until they come into the racist environment of the United States. And we hope that they can react in solidarity with each other, but it's a fiction that Latinos are a group. So likewise, I think ageism is very, very subtle. Paul, you may not have been subject to outright discrimination, but the fact that your ideas may not be considered as seriously as they warrant, or, well, I think there are lots of ways that subtle ageism affects us. And again, some of it is our own unwillingness to be considered old. At almost 77, I'm definitely old, and I'm proud of it. You know, these white hairs I earned. Another thing that happens is an accumulation of physical challenges. I was thinking in preparation for this, I've got something called spondylolisthesis of the fifth lumbar vertebra. It doesn't really bother me, but it's a concern. I've got lymphedema in my left leg as a result of a cancer operation where they sampled lymph nodes and the lymph doesn't return. So I have to wear compression stockings, and the silver lining is it gets me to exercise, but it's annoying. I'm also dealing with a glaucoma in my left eye that isn't yet completely controlled. So we accumulate kind of like in the old days when we made Xeroxes, every generation of Xerox would get blurrier and there would be blotches and so forth. And so our DNA, you know, depending on how healthy we are and how, to some extent, how careful we've been with our diet and exercise and environment, which a lot of us don't have any control over, we're subject to accumulating physical issues. And then there's the fact that as we age, we need rest and are subject to depression. The concept of aging, I think part of the offensiveness of it is this image of someone who's frail and disabled. And as a matter of fact, if we're lucky, we get there because by the time we have put in all of this energy, it takes a toll. So I just want everybody on the call to understand that this is a process that affects all of us to some extent, but many of us differently. So the issues that I wanted to bring up, I'm a member of the California Alliance for Retired Americans. The national organization is called the Alliance for Retired Americans. And it's a group that is it's called a constituency group for the AFL-CIO. There are groups that, like Coalition of Labor Union Women and Pride at Work, A. Philip Randolph Institute, and there are Latin, I forget the exact name of the Latino group, but the Alliance for Retired Americans is actively participating with the labor movement in defending the rights of older workers and community members. We're, at least in California, we're governed by a combination of community elected representatives of member organizations and labor representatives. So in that group, there's a lot, it's a lot more radical than AARP, which actually is almost like an insurance marketer. And our effort is to expand, protect, expand, and improve Social Security and Medicare, as well as Medicaid. And one of the slogans from ARA that I want everybody to remember is scrap the cap. Most of you may know that Social Security contributions are capped at a certain income. It's probably by now around 130,000 or more, but it's a fairly low compared to the salaries that people are earning. After that level, people don't pay into Social Security withholding. So the burden of contributions on Social Security is borne by the lower income workers, and people who are making very comfortable by today's standards, middle income, don't contribute after they've reached that 100 and whatever it is, 30 or 40,000. So just doing that, and Bernie Sanders has carried this as a bill for years, scrapping the cap on Social Security would restore a lot of the fiscal viability and delay this supposed cliff that we're reaching. But another thing that I've noticed in CARA is that we participate in electoral campaigns. There was an initiative on the ballot which failed that would have changed California's Prop 13 taxation system, so that the way Prop 13 works is that the price of a piece of property at purchase is used as its assessed value until it changes hands. That's fine for homes, but industrial and commercial property doesn't change hands as fast as residential property. And the corporations have figured out ways to put their property in holding companies. Anyway, we were going to have industrial and commercial property reassessed if this proposition had passed. And CARA was advocating for older voters to be a primary focus, but the campaign actually tried to work with younger voters, and the older voters vote all the time, and they do tend to be more conservative, excuse me. And so we needed to explain to them, there was a campaign of lies that was propagated to tell older voters that their residential protection for their taxes would be threatened if this passed, and it was a complete lie. It would actually protect residential taxes and add billions to the state economy, which we urgently need. People around the country may not realize, but California's school budgets are close to the bottom. We're down in like the 45th or 48th category of per pupil expenditures because our taxation is hobbled by this Prop 13. Anyway, excuse me, I'm hoping that DSA gets the word out about the Alliance for Retired Americans and can affiliate. I tried to get East Bay DSA to affiliate and was told, oh no, they might do something we don't agree with. Well, that can always happen when you have a coalition, but the CARA, California Alliance for Retired Americans, has been a leader in the fight for single payer, and that's one of DSA's primary campaigns. So maybe we can get the California Association of DSA groups to join, but I felt that there was definitely some ageism involved in not thinking that this was an important group that DSA should relate to. I'm also active in Old Lesbians Organizing for Change, which is a national group and a radical feminist group. One of the things that's come up in that context that's extremely distressing is that many members of OLOC, we call it, have a serious issue with both transgender rights and the new generation's fluidity around gender and use of pronouns and the various ways that in the GLBTQIA movement, lesbians are less salient than we were when we were the new movement challenging homophobia and embracing feminism. And I think, there are a lot of very, very serious issues in which transgender rights are absolutely in need of our support. But there's been a virulent attack on anybody who questioned how this could unfold. And the right of women who want to get together as women, and there's a kind of a noxious term, woman-born woman, I don't like to use, but folks who identify as women at birth, and that it's okay. We fought as feminists for the right to get together. There was consciousness raising, there were all women concerts, and that whole cultural experience has been put into question. And I think that there's a lot of vehement discomfort on both sides of it. I am fully in support of transgender rights, but I know that this is something that the generation of feminists my age still have some problems with. It's dangerous because the right wing has seized on this issue, and we don't want to get in bed with them in any way. But it's important not to shut down legitimate questions about how we can support our transgender sisters and brothers, and also keep the feminist movement strong and alive. I do think within DSA there are younger members. When the surge in membership happened in the East Bay, I had been keeping the chapter going for about 17 years. And I suggested that we have a meeting of the old timers. And some of the younger members, I could tell they felt like they had to monitor me and make sure that I was doing it right. And they had some ideas about how it ought to be done that were pretty firm. And I believe that it's important for the old timers and veterans in DSA to get the respect of our experience. And I'm part of a caucus called North Star that has more older members. We also have some younger members, but we're trying to make sure that the ideas of the veterans are maintained and not minimized or repressed. I think part of that struggle has to do with the fact that that my generation has a harder time, some of us, dealing with social media and technology. We also have less energy. There's the imperative to go out and demonstrate or go door to door and canvass. And that's still possible for some of us, but there's less energy among us than there might have been younger years. And I don't, for example, I have a Facebook account, but I really don't know how to manage it. Things come up and I don't know. I need to take a course online about how to manage Facebook, but I haven't done so yet. And then just lastly,
Susan, could you start wrapping? So,
sure.
Yeah.
Lastly, I just want to say that I feel like the accumulation of physical challenges and energy can be depressing. And the state of the world today, I mean, who would have thought that these battles that we fought for reproductive rights and freedom and democratic extension of civil rights and anti-racism and, all of this is, or that the climate challenge would go unaddressed so fundamentally for so long. It's depressing, folks. And we need to sustain each other and maintain our optimism, as Paul does admirably. And I hope this coming together of seniors can be a beginning of some of that.
Thanks so much, Susan. You reminded me the first time I worked with you was when we were trying to put eco-socialist language into the DSA political perspective in 2015, because we managed to we had a 30,000 word document without any reference to the environment or to ecology. I think with our combined efforts, we managed to get, a few paragraphs into it, just as a marker for the future. So I just want to say, I think all efforts are worthwhile, even if they sometimes feel a bit futile at the moment. It like Rebecca Solnit, one of my great gurus, always says, you just act, and you act the best you can, and you don't worry about the future, because there will be unintended consequences, most which will pay off later on. But that's what we call hope or optimism. Okay, so yeah, well, there's so much to. I've been looking at the chat and the Q&A. Maybe Jeremy or Chris, you could help us see what burning questions seem to be the most common. So I did notice Peg especially talked about social media. What do we do about social media? And my learning curve is pretty slow on social media, although I've learned, learned quite a bit about Slack and Google groups and so forth. But I hate tweeting and I hate the DSA discussion board. I just hate to wade into that crap. But maybe Margaret got some ideas about social media. Thanks.
I do have I want to thank Susan for raising so many issues and also so many options. I want to say something that just to clarify my point of view about the ageism of the young, which you talked about when you were young. I just want to say one thing about college age students whom I know better, I think, because I'm at a university. College age students are very wise now, wised up. They're learning about racism and sexism. And I find that in the classes where they learn about ageism, they are very interested and very quick to pick up the cues in the culture about ageism. And you ask them to write papers about ageism, and they do beautiful work. Or nowadays they're making videos too. They're doing a lot of very interesting things. So I don't want anybody to believe that just because there is this very well-funded background of intergenerational animosity in this contrived war between the generations, that that there is no, that I'm pessimistic about how many people, how many younger people actually fall into the kind of people who pass around boomer remover. I don't feel that. And I don't know the statistics, I don't know the research that has proven it. but we do need to know that it's out there and that it's trying to make up our minds for us. So, but maybe by now you've got, I have two things that I want to point out from the chat, because I've been looking at the chat. Somebody named Mark Schaefer has a comment about Pete Peterson. He called him Peter Pension Eater, which I just think is marvelous. And then Natasha Beck said in 1974, when some of you were, becoming ageist on your own account, her parents had read Maggie Kuhn's autobiography. Maggie Kuhn started the Grey Panthers, and I happen to know a wonderful Grey Panther. It's a coalition in New York City, and it's run by Jack Kupferman. And it's doing wonderful work about nursing home reform. So yeah, any of you in New York can write to me actually, and I'll tell you how to get in touch with him and go to their monthly meetings, which are great, tremendously informative about nursing home reform. And nursing home reform should be at the top of everybody's agenda right now, because Congress now has Biden's proposal, and it also, the states have, many of the states are doing reform movements, and it is the big move before the elections has to be to put every candidate for public office on the spot saying, do you believe in X, Y, and Z about nursing home reform?
Just a quick comment. The statistics about how many of the people that died from COVID were in nursing homes, especially in that first wave, it was really blew my mind. I knew it was bad, but I never realized how bad it was. And just a personal reflection, I'm diabetic and I was 80 years old, or 79, and I kind of minimized the danger to myself. I sort of figured, well, I'm pretty healthy, and although, my wife and I took all the precautions, and we both got a mild version of Omicron, not the bad one, but yeah, that was really scary. But I remember my first reaction was, well, it's not so bad, it's just affecting nursing homes, which was horrible. But that was like my spontaneous reaction. It was like, well, they're not as important as young people. I mean, even though I was part of the target population, so it's like, yeah, I know, false consciousness, Margaret. So, Chris, maybe anything else you've picked up in the chat or Q&A?
Well, one of the things that I think there was a stream of messages about was response to some of what Susan was saying related to the women's movement of the 1960s and 70s, and that there was a vibrant socialist feminist movement in that period. Now, I have to admit, some of the responses maybe because I sent it out to my old friends in the Chicago Women's Liberation Union, which was one of the top organizations. But one of the things that people mentioned and that I've had conversations about is that it seemed as if there was a more positive response to older women like Dorothy Healy and Vicky Starr coming into those movements than there is to people now coming into our movement who are older, and less of a sense of we can learn from that older generation. And I wondered if Susan or Margaret, you wanted to comment on any of that, and if there's a way that we can more effectively work with younger people and be mentors to them than we're doing now.
Susan?
Well, I definitely felt as a younger feminist that we were so hungry for our history, that the history of women's liberation and women's rights had been suppressed. A wonderful writer, Gerda Lerner, talks about the fact that one of the things that happens in feminism is that each generation has to reinvent their rationale because we're unaware of what other women have done. So we were very, very hungry for connections to the feminist past. And I just want to point out a book that I listened to recently. Kianga Yamada Taylor put out a book on the 40th anniversary of the Combahee River Collective, which was a group of African-American lesbians. And their statement stands up today tremendously well. And the book is called How We Get Free. And the recollections of Barbara Smith and Beverly Smith talk about the fact that socialist feminists were the only members of the white women's movement, largely white, not entirely, of course, but to understand that they needed to address racism. And while we fell short in some ways of doing that, they had felt that and were clearly socialist feminists as they founded the concept of intersectionality because race and sex and gender and homophobia were all issues for them, and they couldn't respond to, well, are you a woman or are you African American? You know, making no sense. So that's a group of elders that I want to point out that we could definitely learn from today. And this onslaught against teaching about racism and slavery or our history is another one of the things I didn't mention, but it's so mystifying to me that it gained as much traction as it has under this critical race theory heading, which actually is the opposite of blaming white people individually for racism. It's about the systems.
Yeah. I'm going to move again back to some other things that have been said that I want to respond to. AARP has state leaders in all the states. Some of these state leaders are doing wonderful work in nursing home reform. So those of you who think of AARP as just an insurance, which I used to, not think that much of it. I am very focused on the extraordinary work that is being done by some of those people. In Massachusetts, where I come from, I am part of the Dignity Alliance Massachusetts, which is moving on disability and old age reforms in the entire system. And a lot of the work that's going to happen is going to happen in the States, and AARP has just been marvelous about it. I want to come back, though, to internalized ageism. Ageism is everywhere, and a lot of us have some of it inside us. And I want to recommend Ashton Applewhite's book, which is almost, I guess it's 2018. It's called This Chair Rocks. And it starts off, a lot of it is about de-internalizing our own ageism. So if you don't mind, Paul, I think it will amuse you and entertain you and change you.
Okay. We need a link. I need a housekeeping thing. I said to save the chat. I think I'm wrong about that. I think Zoom when you're doing a webinar, it seems like it's harder to save the chat than on a normal Zoom call. I don't know. Zachary, I know looked at it, and I've had that problem before because I always save the chat on my Zoom calls because it has all the one thing Zachariah said he could do is we could get the list of the emails of the people that joined the call. But I think if you want anything else in the chat, maybe you ought to try to jot it down now because I don't think we can solve that problem. Oh, only the host can save the chats.
So this is Jeremy. I'm hoping that Zachariah can save all the chat because there's an awful lot of really good resources.
Okay, well, we'll do our best. I feel uncomfortable about that because I like to save chats. That's so. we'll work, yeah, Zachariah is working on it. Thank you, Zachariah.
And there's
Okay.
there's going to be a resource list connected to this, I believe.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Who's compiling the
Rowe.
resource list?
Paul Rowe was working on a resource list, and so when we get the email addresses, we can send it out to people. Excuse me.
Great, thank you.
And I had a couple of other things that came up. I think Margaret talked about cohort naming, and that was interesting, I think, to a couple of people about how it wasn't really a thing before the boomers, and then all of a sudden every generation has to be named. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Well, maybe, I mean, there were other generations that got names, but it wasn't a concept that the popular press or that was useful for capitalism. And I think I didn't use the word capitalism in my talk, but it turns out that if you inflict middle ageism on the workforce and you retire people young, you actually are force people out when they're still have plenty of good energy and good work skills and also local, experience in the firm and whatnot. You do that in order to cut your bill for wages, and you hire younger people at lower prices. I mean, you get lower wages. You couldn't do this if we had the unionization of those early years, but we don't. And so it's, I mean, I was actually hoping that DSA viewers would have some ideas about how to end middle ageism. I mean, it's certainly certainly just having human resources people say, diversity, inclusion, they're great, hire them. I mean, we just got that material, that information from EPI, Economic Policy Institute, that 1.1 million extra people are out of the workforce because they have been deleted. And I mean, I think that this is a major issue that for DSA at all ages. I mean, I think a lot of activism comes out of feeling this is urgent and what can we possibly do about it? And I mean, I think now if you do a Google search for ageism, you will actually get a lot of information about it. And it will be, a lot of it will be about these forced retirements, these early job discrimination actions. And that's a good thing because a lot of people who have no interest in politics particularly, are learning that there is something that concerns them. Now, the danger, of course, is that they lose hope, that they anticipate that this is going to happen and that there's nothing that they can do about it. So I really think that ageism in terms of nursing homes and middle ageism in terms of job discrimination, I think we can teach people these are two of the pillars of future politicking. And I just want to say one more thing in answer to what Susan said about, yes, I am definitely not going door to door anymore in New Hampshire. I'm not going to do that. But there are plenty of things that I have been doing in the past 6 years, I guess. I write postcards. Now, very smart people tell me whom to write to. They tell me what should be on the card, and I just do it. And my husband and I have already sent out our first 100 cards. And, by the time of the fall, we will have sent out hundreds of cards. And there's a certain amount of telephoning that I actually like to do, which is when people like Stacey Abrams have a list of phone numbers of voters who are going to vote in the correct way in Georgia or in Pennsylvania or in Ohio or in other states. There are plenty of groups like this who will give us the leads that we need to actually, you know, okay, not boots on the ground, but pens on the table.
Yeah, I agree totally. And I've sent out some postcards, not perhaps as many as I wish. I wanted to mention the kind of nursing home reform that there's one issue that I know of, and I'd like to hear from Margaret what she feels some of the other pressing issues are. In California, CARA is supporting legislation, and I think it even may have passed, but to require nursing homes when they disclose their financial conditions, because to be licensed, they have to report some about their income and when they get public funding. The subsidiary organizations that they use for food or laundry, and many of the abuses of charging too much for nursing home care are obscured in these relationships of contracting out, so that the nursing home itself isn't making profits, but these wholly owned subsidiaries or partially owned are overcharging, and people are getting inferior care because they're saying, oh, we can't keep our ratio of you know, staff up due to economic considerations. And on a related issue, just not in nursing homes, but I feel like there's a huge need for senior housing to have requirements that residents be represented and have resident councils, because there's a lot of abuses. And one of the problems is that some of the residents may have cognitive impairment, but the people who are able to ought to be able to participate and go on record against some of the things like preferential people getting in without fulfilling the waiting lists, and staff who try to buy cars from residents. At, you know, all kinds of strange things happen in senior housing, and resident councils really should be a requirement.
Yeah. Well, I'm very conscious about this transparency issue. The 70% of nursing homes in this country are owned by corporations, and they're for profit, and many of them are owned by hedge funds. So as soon as you dip into that nest of vipers, you are really, it has befuddled congressional critics of the whole system, if you can call it a system. It's a non-system. Centers for Medicare and Medicaid they're changing now under Biden, but it has been a terrible institution. A New Jersey congressman who is very interested in reform has said, you reach into that, you know, he just called it like Russian nesting dolls, the phenomenon that you just described so well. I don't know how to get that except this way. Some of the states are saying the money that comes from the government has to go directly to nursing aides. Like, you can say 50% of it has to go to the aides. You can say 75% of it has to go to the aides. It doesn't go to the nursing home. It must go to the aides. Now, only certain states will accomplish this. And so that's what we should be looking for. Which are the states that are trying to get the Medicare and Medicaid money to go to staffing? I mean, understaffing it was the killer before COVID.
Mm-hmm.
The reason that COVID turned out to be an eldercide in our nursing homes is because understaffing had been left. CMS said nursing homes should have sufficient staffing. That was the guideline. That was the standard. It was a meaningless standard. And now some of the states are trying to say you need 4.1 hours per person per day or more. And some of them are doing it in some other ways. but that's sort of the way to get around the Russian nesting dolls and the vipers who run many of the nursing homes. And the CEOs, I mean, if you give them less money, they'll have to cut the CEO's pay.
Another related issue is in-home supportive services, because it isn't necessary for everybody who ends up in nursing homes to be there, but there's a huge gap between the publicly supported level, which you have to be very poor to access that system, and what people could afford to pay for aids in the home. But overall, staying in the home is better for your health, and it's much cheaper than housing everybody.
Yeah, well, the Biden administration just recently expanded a program called Money Goes with the Person. And it's just what, it's just what you want. It's what I want. Now, only 20 states now participate in that program. I mean, this is one of the problems with the whole long-term care, that it is so disparate, and you have 50 states that have different relationships. And when you get Republican governors, or a Republican like Seema Verma, who was running Centers for Medicare and Medicaid under Trump, and they say, well, the states need to have the power to operate according to their own values. Well, their own values were to starve the nursing homes, or to siphon off the money in some way for other state activities, or not to accept Medicaid expansion. I mean, I've gone off on this other topic because I'm writing a book called American Elder Side. It's just, I started it actually the day we were all locked down. And WHO said, oh, it's a global pandemic. I started it around March 13th, 2020. And
I'm sure it's going to be an interesting book
now.
Already by the title, Margaret. Elder Side, I think, is one we probably could relate to. I just want to think back that one of the first projects of our New American Movement chapter in Pittsburgh in the early 70s was actually to campaign around conditions in public nursing homes. The county homes, which were atrocious. They were just warehouses and with very poor staffing. And we had a number of young New American Movement members who took jobs at Chacin Hospital in Pittsburgh in order to document. And they put out a report, and actually it forced them to close that hospital and replace it with better facilities. But yeah, I mean, this is a long struggle. It bookends. That's now I'm referring to something 50 years ago, but this struggle is really not progressed very much. I used to be a business agent for workers, for SEIU, for workers at nursing homes, and I can guarantee you that their biggest, although they suffered from hours and pay, their biggest issue was continually treatment of the patients. People who care for older people and disabled people really are unhappy and distressed when they don't have the right supplies or the right enough staff to do it. So yeah, I hate to interrupt, because that's a very good discussion. We'll flag it. I did promise you'd have some time for final reflections, but I think maybe Susan and Margaret, you've had the opportunity to chew over that. I'm just looking at the time. Yes. Well, I mean, we're not rushed. We're never going to rush. Let me just invite Susan and Margaret, if you have any thing you want us to take away before we do our more general wrap up.
Well, Sally G in the chat mentioned the elders radical elders organizing, and I sat in on their first meeting a week and a half ago, and it is stunningly constituting veterans from SNCC and Latino organizations. It's much more diverse than most groups. I feel that because our generation was challenged to include racial and ethnic diversity, that as seniors, we still haven't transcended that. But this group is definitely in that vein. And one of the reasons, again, that I stress, we have to network. DSA is not going to be the automatic center of the socialist universe. We need to be in solidarity with comrades from all of the progressive and left groups. And by the way, we need to defeat the right at the midterms.
Yes, yes, right. Well, it's hard to sum up when we've touched on so many different issues, but I think it would be useful if people came away knowing what ageism is, at least in the terms that they feel most moved to act on it. And in line with what Susan is saying about intersectionality, when you look at the nursing homes, the one thing they have in common is poverty. I mean, there are people there who are, and it's about 30%, and it was about 30% in the COVID, the worst COVID year, who are just there because they're recovering from something and they're on Medicare for 100 days. Everybody else is just poor. And sometimes they have been poor all their lives. And sometimes they just got poor because they got old and they couldn't afford assistance. So this is no parenthesis, Susan, but yes, this money for care at home is going to be incredibly important. And the devil's in the details. I hope the Biden plan is going to grow and also to become a permanent plan. It is not now a permanent plan. So, but when you look at, there is actually racial diversity in the nursing homes. There is some gender diversity in the nursing homes, about 30%, depending, you include veterans, of course, there's about 30% men, but they're mostly very poor women. And if you get older, you get poorer. That's just a fact in the United States. If you've been single or you become single, you're poorer. If you're Black and single and were poor, you're going to become even poorer from 70 to 80 and from 80 to 90. And those are the people who died in the elder side. And so that's if intersectionality is your theoretical hold on things, then nursing homes is going to be one of your issues. And if labor is another one of the issue you hold fast to, then middle ageism should be your issue. And those are two big points to take away about ageism and middle ageism. So thank you for giving me this opportunity to sum up. Paul.
Well, thank you, Margaret. I just, again, on housekeeping, Zachariah has managed to put together a document with all the relevant links in the chat. Zachariah, are you going to say, I know you put the link in there and people should click on that and then save it. They can save it by pinning it on there once they click on it. Is there something else you could add about that? But thank you very much for figuring out how to save the chat.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm trying to answer Cedar's question. And unfortunately, I clicked answer it live. So here I am live answering your question. I'm going to post it into the chat once more. I'm very sorry, Cedar. You are correct that we can copy it. If you ask the question again, I will be happy to do it. I just accidentally clicked answer it live.
Well, I clicked on a link and it took me to a document that seemed to have a lot of things. But anyway, you'll continue to work on this in the few minutes we have left, and if it can't be done before the end of this call, we can send it out later, I believe. So we need to wrap a little bit. I think I really like to thank Margaret and Susan. I think it's been fantastic, and there've been a lot of really good participation in the chat from people on this call. I just wanted to, there are a lot of people to thank. Maybe I will do a quick list of some of the people that should be thanked. But so let me see, make sure I don't miss anybody. So Jeremy Granger from Rutgers University Press, who dealt with the book. Ingrid Goldstrom did the text of the announcement. Julia Rogue did the art. Jeff Gold, Michael Dover, Paul Rowe, and Sonia Crooks all helped with Chris Ridial. Zachariah was a fantastic staff person dealing with social media. Maxine Phillips, as usual, from Democratic Left, which together with DSA Fund, sponsored this webinar. I'd like to just suggest people who don't have a little extra money, who aren't as poor as some of the ones that were discussed. DSA Fund is a good place to contribute. I feel much more comfortable making my monthly contribution to DSA Fund than I do to DSA directly, because the unpredictable political lineup sometimes. I think DSA Fund is doing a great job of political education, which is what we need to do. I did want to make a short pitch about Third Act. Third Act, very quickly, is an organization for experienced Americans over 60. It's founded by Bill McKibben and Akaya Windwood. Bill, you all know, the climate activist, who's actually a person I know myself. Akaya Windwood, who I don't know, is an African-American organizer who I think is very a senior advisor and head of the advisory board. I just say on the other people you may also recognize in the advisory board for Third Act are Rebecca Solnit and Mark Schaefer was talking about Julie Shore. She's on the advisory board as well, and along with several people. Sam Brown, who the old Vietnam War organizer, is one of the staff now, or senior advisor. Zach, could you put up? I just want to. I can't say it as well as Akaya says. She has a little 3-minute clip from a Third Act webinar where she talks about how we as the elder generation of activists can relate to the younger generation. You see the link to thirdact.org. If you go to that, I think you'll be impressed. And as I understand, Zachariah, you're going to share your screen to show that short clip. And I think we can just, that's pretty much our time. I just want to say thank you so much to everyone who helped put this together, and to the panelists and participants in the webinar, and see if DSA Fund is, there we go. So see if you agree with me that Akaya Windwood is incredible.
Well, as you know, I've been thinking a lot about eldering or elderhood, and what is our role as people over 60 in the world now? Many of us didn't get eldered, in a capitalist society. Old people are disposable. They're drains on the system. They're burdens. And that is really how many of us have been taught to think about ourselves and see each other. And that is such a travesty, such a waste. What's true is we have a lot to offer. And we've been taught, again, that we don't, that's a lie. So, and what we have been, I've been thinking about, what is the distinction between getting old? And in our last month, I asked people to give some homework to go talk to some folks in the next generations. What do they want from us? So I did my own homework, and I started talking to a bunch of folks. And one of the most surprising things I heard was, first of all, get out of our way. That doesn't mean step aside or step out. It means create some space for those of us who are coming up to grow into our leadership. And one woman said, well, you know, for those of us who do campaign work, we often strategize about how to get around the boomers. And my first reaction was, oh my gosh, that's terrible. And my second reaction was, yeah, I can see why you would have to do that. So I'm going to invite us as folks over 60 to figure out how can we stand beside and with the next generations of leaders and get out of the way. Someone else said, you know, remind us of the things that the dominant society wants us to forget. Remind us, tell us the story of the larger context. Tell that things were possible when you were young that we don't know about. Someone said, see us, love us, be proud of us, hug us, and help us when we go off the rails. Look out for us. So I've been thinking about that, and in that thinking, I'm realizing, oh, it's not what we do, although that's important. It's how we do it and how we be in this work. So of course we want you to, you know, grapple with the banks and the voter stuff and all the things, the climate change. But let us do it from a different place, not from the, we know all things and we always have, but more of a, we have some wisdom to offer and you're welcome here. So you know, Bill, how are you seeing it these days? What are your young folks saying to you about it?
Anyway, I think Akaya is a wise woman and she's a very strong member of that third act team. And I just encourage you to check it out. And as they say on their website, you'll see it. They say, this is not to replace your other political commitments. It's just an adjunct that might be helpful. And I like it. It's just like Susan talks about the ARA. I think this is something which I think is fruitful and I think has a good attitude toward intergenerational organizing. Okay, I think we're done. I've said my thank yous, and I wish you all to live well and prosper.
Thanks. Thanks.
Thank you.